WiSP Sports Radio, the voice of women in sport.
Kia ora, I'm Zoe George and welcome to the July episode of Fair Play, a podcast covering women in sport from athletes and results to current affairs and issues. This podcast is made in association with WiSP Sports, Locker Room and RNZ. If you're into podcasts as much as we are, check out RNZ for politics, crime and lifestyle podcasts. And if you want your sports injection, check out WiSP Sports and Locker Room for everything to do with women in sport. This month we do a deep dive into mixed-gendered sports. Is this the way of the future for sport? We discuss the possible new name for the Basin Reserve. We have an update from paraclimber Rachel Maia, and we chat with WiSP Sports Chris Stafford. And of course, it's not fair play without an update from the toilets at the Basin Reserve. Today we have a panel discussion. Later in the show we hear from sports physician Deb Robinson. But joining me in the studio is Waikato-based sports sociologist and Professor Holly Thorpe and coach of the New Zealand men's and mixed-gendered netball teams, Michelle Hansen-Vaeau. Kia ora.
Good morning.
Oh, before we start, the Silver Ferns. Amazing. Michelle, you must be stoked.
Early this morning, watching it with a couple of the players from the team, still kind of feels surreal, like I'm in the team kind of thing.
Yeah, and you're quite husky this morning, aren't you? You've been like, whoa.
I think it was the England semi that kind of pushed it over the edge, but this morning didn't help.
What a wonderful achievement after a few difficult years for Netball New Zealand.
Absolutely.
I know, they've managed to turn it around. 12 months ago, they were being beaten by Malawi, and now look at them, they're world champions. Nolene Tauro has just turned that around, hasn't she? But with the men's team, they played the Silver Ferns in the lead up to the tournament, didn't they?
Yeah, we played them in a week-long Cadbury series at Bruce Pullman in South Auckland. And Nolene knew exactly what she wanted, which was high athleticism and skill. And I think it was the best preparation that they could have had before heading away to Worlds. And she obviously knew what she was doing because they're world champs.
How do men and women play netball differently?
I think the cool thing about netball is that because it's a non-contact sport as such, that the rules kind of protect you. So there's just, I think the only difference is flair and structure. Generally, the men come through netball a bit later on, so they aren't drilled as much, and the women come with a bit more brains sometimes. So that's probably the biggest difference.
And those games, the Silver Ferns versus the male team, it was so good. It was athletic, it was fast-paced, it was interesting to watch. It's something that I think we haven't seen previously.
No, and I think that's the biggest thing for that series was that the Silver Ferns normally play against the men's or the mixed teams behind closed doors. And playing on television and everyone seeing the next level up that they do play against the guys or the mixed teams meant that they had to go away to Worlds and repeat that, not hide away behind status quo form, I guess.
Well, it's definitely brought the notion of mixed-gendered sports into stark focus. Not only, have we had the men's team play this now World Cup winners, the Silver Ferns, yes, but there's been massive ongoing discussions into whether girls can play in boys' youth grade rugby and league. And while mixed-gendered sport might seem like a new thing, it's actually been around for a while. In youth levels, it's common. We have social sports like indoor netball and football. And at the elite level, we have mixed tennis, equestrian events, dance sports, and mixed relays in various disciplines. But what about high-level contact sports or a sport like cricket, which is based on skill rather than contact? Before we pose these big questions, we need to understand the structure of sport in society. And Holly, this is where you come in. So tell us about the history of sport in New Zealand.
Yeah, well, I think, mixed gender sport is really controversial for a lot of people. And I think when things are challenging like this, like, why are we so upset about this? Or why is it so difficult for us to imagine? It is helpful to look at the history of sport in New Zealand and probably around the world, because really the history of sport, ancient sport and modern sport was created by men for men. and often it was around sort of military training, designed around the extreme possibilities of men's bodies. You know, if we go back to ancient Greece, this is 3,000 years ago, where sport was designed by men for men to reinforce sort of men's status and position in society. And if we think about it like that, 3,000 years of sport being basically designed by men for men's bodies, then we can kind of start to understand why it's so controversial to imagine men and women participating together. Because actually sport is one of the last places in society where men and women are separated out. You know, education, employment, we know the gender roles are so different today than they were when sport was designed. And you know, the structures of sport haven't necessarily changed to reflect our rethinking about gender, where gender's not necessarily binary anymore. It's much more fluid. And so the structures of sport really do need to start reflecting society's different understandings of gender. And we're seeing that in some areas. We really are. If we look at the Olympics in 2020 in Tokyo, they're bringing in more mixed sports. So in athletics, there's going to be 4x400 metre mixed relay, and swimming as well. But that still requires men and women. Right? It doesn't necessarily recognise trans or non-binary athletes who still do get kind of shut out of sport when we think about it as men's sport and women's sport. And in New Zealand, obviously, we have a history of rugby and netball being some of our dominant sort of team sports from the late 19th century, early 20th century, and you know, rugby seen as the men's sport and netball being seen as the sport for good New Zealand women or ladies. But obviously significant changes since then, both in our netball, in our rugby, of course, with our incredible female athletes, but across a whole range of other sports that people, you know, in New Zealand have access to that aren't necessarily men's sport or women's sport. Actually, the growing popularity of sport is around recreational activities where people get to participate with people from, you know, different sexes, different ages, different ability levels, and who identify with different genders.
It's really interesting looking at the traditional roles of women in sports. So we used to play a supporting role in sport. We'd sit on the sideline, we'd make the sandwiches, dare I say it. We drive the taxis, we look after the children. We still kind of all do all of those things and participate.
Prepare the oranges.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, right? But that's all changing, isn't it?
Absolutely. We don't have to look too far from the netball, the rugby, across a whole range of sports to see women competing on the world stage as athletes, as coaches, as managers. And this is, you know, we've got a huge investment from our government in investing in girls and women's sport, right from the recreational level right up to leadership roles. And the more women we have in leadership roles, hopefully the structures of sport are going to continue to change to better reflect our changing gender relations in society.
One of the issues that's often discussed about the physical differences between men and women. So I put this to leading sports physician Deb Robinson. It might be a simple question, but I started by asking her what the main physical differences are between men and women.
The main differences are both physical and physiological, and they can mostly be related to testosterone. So testosterone in men has a little surge in utero in men in the first year of life, and it has some minor effects, but then mostly has an impact after puberty. And the kinds of things that testosterone does is it creates longer bones and larger bones and heavier bones. So that's a mechanical advantage, longer leverage, bigger frame, and the bigger frame can support more muscle. It also tends to give a higher hemoglobin level. Hemoglobin is what carries oxygen around in the blood, so that means that males have an ability to transfer oxygen better. Overall, they'll have a higher muscle mass to body weight ratio, so they're faster, they're stronger, they're more powerful, they have greater acceleration. If you took out the larger muscle mass and you just compared muscle strength relative to the cross-sectional area, men and women are very similar, but because men have more, that means they're stronger. So it's mostly around bigger body, more muscle, longer levers, but also that ability to have a higher hemoglobin. They're the basic differences.
Are women at risk of getting hurt in mixed-gendered contact sports?
I think that's all very situational. So it depends on what the sport is and what age they are, and I think that's a really important part of the argument. So some of the recent cases in New Zealand have been for younger people, and that's why sports will often have an age restriction of under 13, and that is because most males aren't reaching puberty until that age. We know there's some that start that earlier, but on the whole, up until the age of 13, it's reasonably equal playing field, and therefore it is safe. But once puberty kicks in and the males are bigger, stronger, faster, then there are some risks. And I think when sports are trying to weigh up fairness versus safety, then they're erring, rightly so, on the side of safety. And so they put some restrictions around contact sports. So in the non-contact sports, then obviously the risks are much less. There are performance issues, but the risks are much less.
You said earlier about things like testosterone. What about those with bodies that are considered outside the norm, like Kastia Semenya?
So she's an interesting case in that she comes under a group of medical differences that we call the difference of sexual development. They're actually quite rare, but when you have a case like Kastia, it really brings it to light. So they're where the changes happen usually before birth, and the reproductive organs and the genitals don't develop quite as expected. So you can have a mixture of male and female sexual characteristics. So you can be genetically female, but you can have some of the reproductive organs of a male and therefore have testosterone. There are various other combinations, but that's probably the most common one. And so having testosterone means that the testosterone level can reach that of male. So you've got a genetic female with the levels of testosterone in male. So obviously that has some associated benefits we've just talked about. Now, the problem also is that a lot of the research hasn't been completed, and that even though those women have high testosterone levels, they can't transfer it into the most potent form of testosterone, and also their receptors. So that's at the cell level. They don't have the receptors that the males have. So we haven't quite sorted out how much benefit they get. They definitely get some, but how much is the difficult one? And that's where a lot of the arguments are at the moment, is that decisions being made without all of the research being done.
Well, they were asking her to take medicine to reduce her testosterone level, her natural testosterone level, which has been an ongoing debate for the last few months. She performed very well at the Diamond League recently, absolutely winning all of her competitions by massive lengths. I wonder what she'd be like if she was up against someone who had the same testosterone level as her, or is that not measurable? Can we not do that?
Well, the problem is that males have ranges from about 8 to 29 nanomoles per litre. Women are 0.1 to 1.8. So there's a vast difference. So then even if you take the women with the highest testosterone levels, they're significantly lower than the men with the lowest testosterone level. That's our problem. And so what they've decided with people like Kastia is they've asked her to take hers down to 5 nanomoles. So it's still higher than women, but it's lower than where they sit. And so there's a bit of guesswork in that, and I think that's the hard thing when you pose your question is where do you find those people? You can only find those people if you probably chemically make them all sit at around the 5 nanomole level. That's the only way you'll answer the question and get people to compete like that. So all the time it's that whole kind of fairness, so fairness for women that she's competing against versus what's practical and what's not discriminatory. So I think it's a really difficult argument.
We're talking to sports physician Deb Robinson about the physical aspects of cross-gendered sport. Where do trans people sit within this area of sport?
So they're slightly different, but the same. And the difference is that particularly males who trans to females, they had the benefit of having testosterone as they were growing. So they have all the muscle mass, bone strength, oxygen transfer as they're growing up. And then they are asked to decrease their testosterone to 10 nanomoles per litre. So it's a little bit different to those with a difference of sexual development. And so, again, it's an attempt to make it fairer, but it's still probably not fair to those now we've determined cis females, those who are born female and whose gender is female. And that's the argument that's come out recently by the Otago University study, and they say that this probably is going to err more on the side of an ethics argument rather than a physiological argument. So some of the sporting bodies, particularly the IOC, have really largely made their decisions based on hormonal, physiological kind of argument. And so now the sports ethics people are coming in and saying that probably the amount of credence you place on ethics needs to be increased. So we need to kind of move a little bit more to the fairness. And so what is the kind of long-term answer? Well, people are starting to say that maybe we need to have females against females, and then there needs to be sort of other competitions for including people that have different levels of testosterone. And if you remember talking about those with a difference of sexual development, they don't have the ability to use their testosterone to such an extent, whereas the transgenders did use their testosterone to its normal extent as when they were male. So they are a slightly different group. I always like to divide that up into the kind of young group, so the under-13s, and I think sporting bodies need to just have a set of guidelines. And most of the contact sports in New Zealand do have a set of guidelines. And then sporting bodies at the provincial and club level have got something to be guided by. And that would usually allow girls and boys to play together. But also we then need to have a sort of a situation that can arise where we need to relook at an individual. And that might be in the area of New Zealand where, say, a girl doesn't have the ability to play in an all-girls team because it's not available. And those decisions can be made on common sense. So safety and fairness and just individualise the decision. The older age group is more difficult, I think, because I think health and safety is paramount at the moment. And so we, again, need to make sure we balance the discrimination, fairness, physiological differences and common sense. And we do need to take the lead from some of our international bodies, but as we know, they're struggling to make those decisions. So we need to keep an eye on what's happening at the international level and then make our own guidelines for our own sports in New Zealand based on those. But we've got a lot of things to consider. It's not just physiological.
Sports physician Deb Robinson. Having mixed-gendered sports also opens up a pathway for trans athletes. Michelle, what's your experience in this space?
So I've played netball for 2 decades, giving away my age a bit there.
You're still young.
And I think the reason why I play netball is because it's one of those sports that has a mixed element and that you can represent regardless of your gender or your sexual identity. I have tried other sports, and I'm not going to lie, it is kind of daunting rocking up and people not understanding what trans is or you wanting to participate. So, yeah, look, I think I agree. There needs to be a real culture change and shift on what the norm is and trying to understand that sports needs to be played by all. And the more neutral sports that you can have, the better for that sport.
Michelle Hansen-Vaeau and sports sociologist Professor Holly Thorpe are our guest today. Michelle, did you transition when you were playing sport?
Yeah, so I transitioned at the end of high school, which was really quite hard because I was playing volleyball at the time and had a huge future in that field, and then kind of got bullied and pushed out and ended up having to go to indoor netball where I knew there were people that that looked and acted like me. Not that the whole sport's like that, but it was where I felt a lot more comfortable and able to be myself and participate without my gender being questioned. And that's why I've chosen to stay with netball as my sport of choice, is because you just get to be yourself.
There is still a lot of intolerance within the wider culture of sport in New Zealand. Why do you think that is?
Going back to what people perceive sport as, you normally play netball because it's the pretty game, and you play rugby because it's what you play when you're a tough bloke. So it's probably just understanding that anyone with any ability can play sport, and that's probably the downfall to a couple of sports, is that the gender norms in those sports haven't been shifted, and I'd love to see them shift. I think the women's rugby team are doing an awesome job of moving it, and Netball New Zealand having this last series against the men's is changing it, but look, not changing fast enough.
Holly, what do you think about changing that current culture within sport in New Zealand?
Yeah, I think we're seeing huge progress with some of our leading athletes, as Michelle was mentioning. But I would like to put something a little bit controversial on the table, because I think as we move, society forward and recognising different ways people identify with different genders, I would love to see. I don't think we unpack or dissolve or get rid of, men's sport and women's sport, because the majority do identify with that, and we love watching it, right? There's definitely an audience for it and a need for it. But I'd love to see another category, which is, gender-free sport or sport beyond gender, where you could have trans, non-binary, cis, men, women, where it's actually about just whoever is best. So obviously athletes would be wanting to compete to see if they are the best in the world, regardless of gender. But I think that would be a great way to open it up, because I think if we keep fighting for these binary forms of sport, it's still really, really limiting. And what we're seeing with athletics and what they're requiring of women's bodies when they don't fit particular norms. I mean, horrific hormonal expectations where they're required to go on these year-long, treatments to bring their hormone levels down. I mean, that's just horrible. And if we look to the Olympic Charter, principle number 4, they say the practice of sport is a human right. Every individual must have the possibility of practicing sport without discrimination of any kind, and in the Olympic spirit, which requires mutual understanding with a spirit of friendship, solidarity and fair play. And I'd love to see society moving more towards gender fluidity and understanding that these very binary ways of thinking that sport still continues to reinforce. Sport could be a powerful way to help move along in these more inclusive understandings of sport, where sport is a human right.
Vaeau and Waikato-based sports sociologist Professor Holly Thorpe. All right, okay. So what are some considerations we need to make regarding mixed-gendered sports? We've already touched on a few, but what's the silver bullet here? Is there one?
I don't think so. It's so complicated. Gender is so complicated. It's not just about physiology. And I think that's, if we think too much about the science of evidencing the difference between men and women's bodies, or I think it's much more than that. Gender is a social construction. There's all these different elements to it. So there's not going to be a silver bullet, because gender is complicated, and I think any sorts of responses need to recognise the many ways that people identify with gender, and sporting structures are moving, but maybe not fast enough. And I think when we look to the history of sport, that it's been trying to reinforce binary ideas around gender. We recognise why it's so difficult.
Michelle, what do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree with Holly on that one. It's I don't think it'll ever be resolved, but it's cool to see some shifts and some movement around it. And at the end of the day, sports comes down to the broadcasters and whoever provides the money for the event. So until they come on board and see the interest and the need for it, it will just stay at the levels that it's at.
Everyone should be able to participate in sport. And over the past few months, we've been covering the progress of paraclimber Rachel Maia. You may remember in April we covered her amputation. Since then, she's been busy rehabbing and preparing for the Worlds, which have just been in France. She was among athletes from 24 different countries and one of 2 representing New Zealand, including Di Drayton. She was the other. Rachel placed 4th in the lower limb amputee section. That's great stuff, Rachel. Not bad for someone who had their left leg amputated below the knee only 5 months ago. Incredible. Absolutely
what a remarkable athlete.
She is just amazing, and she's a regular here on Fair Play, and we will continue to follow her progress. She did very well at the Nationals back in June as well, winning her classes, so it's just fabulous to see her do so well. All right, let's cross to the United States now to catch up with WiSP Sport founder, president and executive producer Chris Stafford. Kia ora, Chris.
Well, hello, Zoe. Great to be chatting with you again. It's been a long time, hasn't it?
It has been. We've been talking about the Netball World Cup. A few of us are a little bit tired today, as you can just imagine. What a game.
Huge congratulations. I think the quote of the week has to come from your coach who said our fossils stood up and led from the front. They really did, didn't they?
Absolutely. Interesting. We talked about the men's team and the build-up for the World Cup, and it's quite interesting watching the Australian team, women's team, versus the New Zealand men's team. I'd like to see that because both teams are quite physical.
It's a different game to what we played at school.
Yes, very. What do you think about that, Michelle?
Oh, it'll be interesting. Look, Australia play against their state men's teams behind closed doors. I don't think they're quite ready to shift and make it a spectacle for everyone to enjoy. I think if you look back at the Cadbury series, I think the guys were on the ground more than the girls in that game. So they're all pretty physical at the elite level.
Very physical, absolutely. Something else that has been, other than let's not talk about the cricket and the men's cricket, but let's talk about the women's soccer football World Cup. You're based in the States, Chris. What's the feeling been like following their victory?
It's been huge, Zoe. There's been a wonderful welcome for the team since they got back, because this success or the sport now has gone way beyond the playing field. The effect of the women's soccer team, their campaign, of course, for equal pay as well. It's gone way beyond sport. And when you see the reaction from the crowds at in Manhattan, when they had the ticker tape parade for them, and the speeches in front of the town hall, or the city hall, the New York City Hall, I should say, and the media coverage has been huge, and the ripple effect. They've been on all of the major networks. All of the women have just been doing the rounds. They spent 2 days solid doing the rounds afterwards on major networks, not just talking about their success, but talking about the message and the impact that they've had, not just on soccer, not just on sport, but way beyond that. I think it's been phenomenal for the equality movement. Mm-hmm. And when some people, like Billie Jean King, for example, has said, I think we've got a second wave of equality. Well, I think the tide has been rippling for now since... Well, of course, it slowed down. I mean, for a while, I picked up again, I think, after the London Olympics, which you will remember, Zoe, was when WiSP came along, when we realized that there was like a movement now for more women's sports coverage. And part of that has been the message of equality.
Absolutely. It was at the final of the Football World Cup, the crowd chanting, equal pay, equal pay. It was like, it just kind of hit me right in the guts going, yes, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting to think about the role that social media is playing in this next wave of sort of feminist movement in sport, where athletes have had sort of taken that space up to represent themselves, to communicate their stories in their own voices as well. And if we look at sort of the way Megan Rapinoe's been doing that in quite political, activist kinds of ways, and it's actually remarkable and wonderful to see.
Yeah, Megan has been a tremendous voice for the sport, and she's now, if you like, our Billie Jean King of today. Not that Billie Jean King is by any means retired, but yeah, I think that it takes one person, doesn't it? At least somebody who's just a little bit bolder and a bit, more extrovert, a bit more outgoing, and quite prepared to, to stick her neck above the parapet, and which Megan Rapinoe has absolutely done. And I don't know if you've noticed, also she's took the knee, as we call it, for the national anthems, and she says until we get equality, until it's not just about equal pay. It's African Americans. It's whatever color of your skin, whatever your gender, whatever your sexual preference. All of these things are coming now into that political forum, which we're calling sport, and soccer has been a vehicle for.
I just love seeing these female athletes, or these athletes, these strong women like Megan, using that platform to be bold and brave and to speak out on these bigger social issues. It's so wonderful.
It really is, yeah. It's been fantastic for the sport, and I think it will continue to, because they are going through the courts right now. But there's such a huge wave of support behind them now from this, based on the success that they had. You can't really argue, as Megan says, it's not about equality anymore. We've got past that. We've convinced people that we are worthy of equal pay, but the message has gone way beyond their paychecks, that's for sure.
Yeah, I wonder how this ripple effect will affect sport in New Zealand. Michelle, the Silver Ferns earn an okay wicket, but what about the men's and mixed gender teams? Is that flowing on to them too?
So it's completely self-funded, and at the moment we're working together around trying to set up a professional environment. So unfortunately, we're not even 10 cents to the dollar because we pay for everything on our own. And that's our female athletes as well in the New Zealand mixed team, who do a great job and are currently, along with the Silver Ferns, the world champions for mixed netball. So it would be nice to see some shift on that, but I think I won't hold my breath on that one.
I know you've been talking about this mixed gender teams, being one of them, sailing being another. Where do you stand, and what's the feeling over there about mixed gender teams generally?
It's also the history of these sports too, isn't it? Because every sport has its own sort of gender relations. And so some sports in New Zealand which are more entrenched in sort of ideas around masculinity are those that we kind of most feel, societal at the society level might feel more uncomfortable about. Men and women's, playing rugby together might be, very controversial, but whereas playing tennis, mixed tennis, not so big of a concern. So the histories of these sports and these unique gender relations play a part in sort of, I think, how our society feels about mixed gender sport.
This world is opening up in terms of gender and equality. It's all opening up. It's like, that anything's possible now in a way. Because we look at gender so differently to what we did 10 years ago, much as 20 years ago. So,
absolutely.
I think society's attitude is changing. Right now I'm in New Orleans, which is one of the most open societies, I think, in any city in the US. And, there's just a different atmosphere generally. And I think while there's some societies that are behind, I think what happens in sport is happening in society as well. So I think the playing field is completely opening up. Is it a good thing? I like the idea in a way of a mixed team for some sports, but I think rugby is a hard one, isn't it? I mean, cricket is another hard one, but you have to look at what is going to balance out and what's going to be fair play, literally, no pun intended, for the individual sports versus the team sports when it comes to mixed gender. Because it works in sailing, for example. It works very well in equestrian sport, and it works well in tennis.
Chris Stafford from WiSP Sports, thank you so much for joining us this week.
A delight again. Absolutely. Keep up the good fight down there. And once again, congratulations on your win in the World Cup.
All right, moving on. It's been a busy few weeks for the Basin Reserve. A group called Support Women's Sport are lobbying to have its name attached to the cricket ground. So it could be called Support Women's Sport Basin Reserve. They started a campaign last week and it's already raised more than $7,000. It's got the backing of some high-profile sportswomen, the Wellington Mayor and the Minister of Sports. Michelle, what do you think of this name?
I love it.
Yeah?
I mean, why not?
It's intended to stir up the debate around the disparities between men and women's sport, and it's doing that, right? So we're talking about it. It's more and more people are talking about it. So I think it's doing exactly what was intended to do.
Yes, it's very interesting. There's been lots of comments. It's not fair play without an update from the toilets. As you may be aware, this has been an ongoing discussion for the past 20 months. Last month, we heard how the tender process had been completed and contractors named. This month, the Wellington City Council has provided me with the proposed plans for the new toilets in the soon-to-be refurbished museum stand. I call that a win. But that's where the win ends. In the plan, across 3 floors, there are 2 new accessibility toilets, 6 unisex toilets, 6 in the women's toilets, and 10 men's toilets, including 6 urinals and 4 stalls. Women's toilets only get 2/3 of the space allocated to men's. The floor space dedicated to women's toilets is 18 metres squared, while that of men's is located right next door to the women's is 25 metres squared. And there's also 2 entry points for the men's loos, while there's only 1 for women. And in the women's toilets, they feature a cleaner's cupboard. Women would also have to queue in the corridor, while the men have entry points, 1 from the corridor and 1 other directly outside. So I've gone back to the council to get some clarity around the designs, and the Wellington City Council says, quote, "We believe the issue of floor space is somewhat irrelevant, especially if you're talking about 7 square metres difference. We're more interested in the number of toilets." The council says, quote, "As the asset owner, it's satisfied there are sufficient toilet facilities for men, women and others." The design has already been signed off by the council, and the date on the plans is the 15th of April this year. I've also put questions to the lead designers and to the Wellington City Councillor and Basin Reserve Trust member Fleur Fitzsimmons. Hopefully we'll hear back from them soon.
Conversations from the world of women's sports. This is WiSP Sports Radio.
And that's it for this month's Fair Play. Thank you so much, Holly Thorpe, for being on the show today. Your insight into the sociology and structure of sport has been incredible. And Michelle Hansen-Vaeau, thank you as well. Also, big thanks to Deb Robinson and Chris Stafford. Don't forget, you can join the conversation at RNZ, at Locker Room and at WiSP Sports. I'm Zoe George. Don't forget to play hard, but play fair.